May 23, 2026. A neighbor sees something outside the house on Ohmer Road in Hamden, Ohio. They call it in. May 27th. It happens again. May 29th. Again. May 31st. One more time. 4 times. 9 days. 4 separate complaints. 4 separate incidents documented by the Vinton County Sheriff's Office involving Gary Siders Jr., 36 years old, resident of 182 Ohmer Road, allegedly exposing himself outside the house to people who were not members of his household. Not once, not twice. 4 times in 9 days. A warrant was issued, and on June 30th, 2026, when deputies arrived at that address to serve it, they found something that had nothing to do with the reason they came. I want to start there, with the 4 incidents, not with what investigators found on June 30th, not with the charges, the attorneys, the legal proceedings, the grand jury that's being assembled. I want to start with the 4 incidents in May, because I think the way this case entered public consciousness, through the discovery, through the press conferences, through the images that circulated online, created a frame around it that makes it easy to miss something. The frame is, law enforcement found something terrible in a house in rural Ohio, but the actual sequence is different. The actual sequence is, law enforcement was called to that house because of something that was happening outside it, something that a neighbor saw and reported, something that Gary Siders Jr. apparently did without much concern for who was watching or what might happen as a result. 4 times, in 9 days, to people who had nothing to do with his family. I want to be very careful about what I'm saying here. The indecent exposure charges are misdemeanor charges in Ohio. 4th-degree misdemeanors, punishable by up to 30 days in jail and a fine of up to $250 per count. They're not felonies. They're not the child endangerment charges that Gary Jr., Elizabeth, Gary Sr., and Christina are all facing. They're separate. They're proceeding on a separate track. Gary Jr. has pleaded not guilty to the child endangerment charges. His hearing on the indecent exposure charges has been postponed twice, originally scheduled for July 9th, moved to July 23rd, now moved to August 13th. So I'm not here to convict Gary Siders Jr. of anything. The legal system will do what the legal system does, but I am here to ask a question that I think the public record raises, a question that I haven't seen anyone ask directly, a question that's been sitting in the space between what the documentation shows and what it doesn't say. If a person behaves in a certain way outside a house, in public, where anyone can see, where the consequences of being observed are real and documented and legal, what does that tell you about how that person might behave inside a house, where no one can see, where the consequences of being observed don't exist, where there are no neighbors close enough to notice what happens behind closed doors? I'm not answering that question. I want to be completely clear about that. I'm asking it, because the investigation is asking it, and because the documented facts, not speculation, not theories, not internet rumors, the actual documented facts about what Gary Jr. was charged with before June 30th, raise it in a way that I think deserves direct examination. Now, let me give you the full context of those 4 incidents, because I think context matters here. Court records reviewed by NBC4 Columbus show that the 4 counts of public indecency involving Gary Siders Jr. all stem from alleged violations of an Ohio law that prohibits recklessly exposing a person's private parts. The alleged incidents occurred on 4 dates in late May 2026, the 23rd, the 27th, the 29th, and the 31st. All 4 involved people who were not members of his household. The warrant for his arrest on these charges was issued on June 30th, 2026, the same day the warrant was served, the same day law enforcement arrived at 182 Ohmer Road, the same day everything came to light. Now, 4 misdemeanor charges in 9 days is a specific pattern. It's not a one-time incident. It's not an isolated lapse in judgment followed by course correction. It's 4 times, in 9 days, documented, reported, resulting in a warrant. Think about what that pattern tells you about a person's relationship with consequence, or the absence of it. Because here's the thing about doing something 4 times in public in 9 days. The first time, maybe you could argue, poorly, but you could argue, that it was situational. Something went wrong, something unusual happened, it won't happen again. The second time, that argument collapses. The third time, you're describing a pattern. The fourth time, 9 days after the first, you're describing something about a person's understanding of what they can do and who can stop them. And this is the person who lived inside that house on Ohmer Road, with 16 individuals who had no school enrollment records in Vinton County, no medical records that investigators have been able to locate from recent years, no contact with the outside world that would have generated the kind of documentation that usually follows people through life in a society with institutional infrastructure. 16 individuals who were, by every indication from the investigation, entirely dependent on the 4 adults in that household for everything. I keep coming back to that word. Dependent. Not in a neutral sense. In the specific, documented sense that the investigation has established. 16 people who couldn't leave, who had no school to go to where a teacher might notice something, who had no pediatrician whose records might flag a concern, who had no friends outside the household who might ask questions, who had no contact with any system that has mandatory reporting requirements, entirely dependent on a man who, in the 9 days before his arrest, did what the public record shows he did, 4 times, to strangers, in public. Let me talk about the timeline around those 9 days, because I think it matters. May 23rd is the first documented incident. That's a Friday. The warrant wouldn't be issued for another 5 weeks. So from May 23rd to May 31st, Gary Jr. is still at that address, still living inside that house, still present in the household that would eventually be found in the condition it was found in on June 30th. And during those 9 days, between the first incident and the fourth, the household continues. The 16 individuals continue to be in that house. Whatever the daily reality of that household looked like, it continues. On May 31st, the fourth incident is reported. A warrant is prepared. Between May 31st and June 30th, a full month, the warrant exists but hasn't been served. And during that month, the household at 182 Ohmer Road continues in whatever state it was in. June 30th, deputies arrive to serve the warrant for misdemeanor indecent exposure. They find what they find. The Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson said the conditions were almost indescribable. He described it as one of the worst scenes he had ever witnessed in his career. Officials reported that some individuals had significant developmental gaps consistent with prolonged isolation from educational and social systems. 7 were hospitalized. 2 were transported to specialized medical facilities in Columbus. 1 required intensive medical care. Now, I want to say something here that I think is easy to overlook when you're focused on the larger picture of the case. The warrant that led to all of this was a misdemeanor warrant, punishable by up to 30 days in jail. Maximum fine of $250 per count. That's what brought law enforcement to that door. A misdemeanor warrant for someone repeatedly doing something outside the house that neighbors found objectionable enough to call in. And behind that door was what the Ohio Attorney General described as one of the worst scenes he had ever witnessed. Former Vinton County prosecutor Aaron Payne said the investigation extends beyond Vinton County, that it reaches into multiple Ohio counties and potentially out of state. That the full scope of what investigators are piecing together goes well beyond what happened in Hamden. A computer crimes division was reportedly involved, a unit that handles digital evidence in complex investigations, adding another layer to what authorities are building toward the grand jury. The investigation is assembling something, and what Gary Jr. did outside that house in May 2026, 4 times to strangers, documented in court records, is part of the foundation that investigators are working from. Let me tell you about the hearing postponements, because I think they're more significant than they've been reported. Gary Jr.'s indecent exposure case, the case that started all of this, was scheduled for a hearing on July 9th. His attorney asked for a continuance, moved to July 23rd. His attorney asked for another continuance, moved to August 13th. 2 postponements on a misdemeanor case for a man who is already facing 16 counts of second-degree felony child endangerment. Why does a defense attorney delay a misdemeanor case that's far less serious than the felony case the same defendant is already facing? Former Ohio prosecutor Mark Pete Meyer gave the clearest public analysis of this when he spoke on air about the case. He explained that if the misdemeanor case moves forward on its own track, with its own hearings, its own witnesses, its own evidentiary record, it could create material that the prosecution uses in the larger child endangerment case. Details that come out in the indecency case could inform how investigators frame the broader pattern they're building. Testimony that emerges in one case can be used in another. By delaying the misdemeanor case, Gary Jr.'s attorney is potentially keeping a wall up between the two proceedings, keeping the evidentiary records from developing in ways that could hurt his client in the more serious case. That's a strategic decision. It's a legal one. Defense attorneys make this kind of call all the time, but the reason it's being made tells you something about how Gary Jr.'s legal team views the relationship between those 4 incidents in May and the larger investigation that followed. They're connected. His attorney knows they're connected, and slowing down the smaller case is one way to manage how that connection gets made in court. Now let me step back and give you the full picture of Gary Siders Jr. as the public record shows him, because I think understanding who he is, or at least who the documented record suggests he is essential to asking the question this video is built around. Gary Siders Jr. is 36 years old. He is the son of Gary Siders Sr., 73, and Christina Siders, 67. He married Elizabeth, whose name before she joined this family was Elizabeth Russell, in Mason County, West Virginia, in March of 2008. He was 18. She was 15. His education at the time of that marriage was listed on the marriage certificate as having stopped at the 9th grade. Hers at the 8th. 2 months after the wedding, the first of what would become 16 individuals born into that household arrived. The family has lived at multiple addresses across Ohio since 2008. Birth records obtained by NBC4 Columbus trace them through at least 5 separate properties: in Gallipolis, in Bidwell on Poplar Church Road, in Cheshire on Honeysuckle Drive in Gallia County, and finally in Hamden on Ohmer Road in Vinton County. That movement spans approximately 18 years across multiple counties, with investigators now saying the trail potentially extends beyond Ohio entirely. At the Cheshire house, the one on Honeysuckle Drive, a woman who works nearby told reporters covering the case that she remembered Gary Jr. He came into her store regularly, not for groceries, not for household supplies, for scratch-off lottery tickets, scratchers, every time that's what he bought. One time, she said, he tipped her $10. I keep coming back to that, the $10 tip, the scratch-off lottery tickets, because I've been through every public document in this case, every court filing, every press conference, every attorney statement, every neighbor interview that's made it into verified reporting. And somehow that detail. Gary Jr. at a register, buying scratchers, tipping the cashier $10, being the kind of customer she remembered fondly enough to mention to a reporter. Somehow that lands differently than almost anything else, because it's so normal, so completely, unremarkably normal. He drove to the store, picked his tickets, paid, tipped, drove back to 182 Ohmer Road, where the Ohio Attorney General would later describe conditions as almost indescribable. 2 worlds, right next to each other, separated by a car ride and a front door. I've thought a lot about why that detail hits so hard, and I think it's this. It tells you that Gary Jr. was functional in the outside world. He could interact with people. He could be friendly. He could do ordinary things without raising any alarm in the people around him. The cashier didn't notice anything unusual. The store didn't call anyone. Nobody who encountered him at that register had any reason to think something was wrong. The outside world saw a normal enough person, and the inside of that house was something investigators described as unlike anything they had encountered. The two existed at the same time. Let me talk about the house itself, not the conditions, which I'm not going to describe in detail, but the geographic and social isolation of the property, because I think it matters for understanding how the situation there developed and persisted. Hamden is a community in Vinton County, Ohio. Vinton County is the smallest county in Ohio by population. According to reporting by ABC News, it has 1 traffic light and a single grocery store. It's described as isolated Appalachian terrain, rural, remote. The kind of place where properties are spread out and neighbors don't necessarily know what's happening on land that's not immediately adjacent to their own. 182 Ohmer Road sits in that context. In a community small enough that when the arrests happened, people gathered at the local church the same evening. In a county so small that the prosecutor said assembling an impartial grand jury locally would be nearly impossible. That they may need to bring jurors in from neighboring counties or convene a special grand jury with rotating panels to handle the volume of evidence. A county that the state of Ohio is describing as facing an unprecedented child welfare crisis. In that county, in that community, with those neighbors who were close enough to see Gary Jr. outside in May 2026, close enough to call in what they saw 4 times in 9 days, but who told reporters they had never seen the 16 individuals who were inside, never saw them outside, didn't know they were there. The neighbor from Cheshire, where the family lived before Hamden, said he thought there were about 9, that the family kept to themselves, that he saw some of them outside occasionally. Mostly they stayed in the house. The outside of Gary Jr.'s world was visible. The lottery tickets, the $10 tips, the incidents in May that neighbors reported 4 times. All of that was visible to the outside world. The inside wasn't. Let me now talk about where the legal case stands today, because the picture has developed significantly since the initial arrests on June 30th, and it's worth laying out clearly. All 4 defendants, Gary Siders Jr., Elizabeth Siders, Gary Siders Sr., and Christina Siders, face 16 counts each of second-degree felony child endangerment. All 4 pleaded not guilty at their arraignment on July 1st. All 4 waived their preliminary hearings on July 7th, sending the case directly to a grand jury. No grand jury date has been set. Former prosecutor Mark Pete Meyer has said he believes a special grand jury will need to be convened, a dedicated grand jury for this case specifically, with rotating panels if needed to handle the volume and complexity of the evidence. In a county with the population of Vinton, finding enough impartial jurors for a standard grand jury process and then for multiple trials is a genuine logistical challenge. Gary Siders Sr., 73, is out of custody, released on a recognizance bond with GPS monitoring because his medical care, following a fall at the jail and the discovery of a serious medical condition, was deemed potentially too costly for Vinton County to absorb while he remained incarcerated. His attorney Dorian Baum has filed for a competency evaluation. Gary Sr. reportedly could not identify the role of the judge or his own attorney when he appeared in court. A not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect defense is being considered. Christina Siders, 67, has been the quietest of the 4 defendants publicly. Her attorney has filed a non-dissemination motion and subsequently secured a second gag order in the case, the first having been issued for Gary Jr.'s case. The second gag order, granted by Judge Lena Featherolf Rogers, is less restrictive than the first, but represents a court's determination that public discussion of certain aspects of the case should be limited. Elizabeth Siders, 33, is still in the Southeastern Ohio Regional Jail on a $300,000 bond. Her attorney Tommy Stolley has filed a motion seeking bond reduction, arguing that she is not a flight risk and that the individuals she is charged with endangering are no longer in her care. The filing states that her principal desire is eventual reunification. Stolley has said his office is still investigating whether Elizabeth qualifies as a victim in addition to a defendant, a question that the documented history of her entry into this family at 15, with an 8th grade education, after what her own brother described as a process of indoctrination spanning 15 years, makes genuinely complicated. And Gary Siders Jr., 36, is in the Southeastern Ohio Regional Jail, facing 16 felony counts, with a misdemeanor hearing postponed to August 13th, with an attorney who is managing the relationship between 2 separate legal tracks very carefully. The same Gary Siders Jr., who drove to the store for scratchers, who tipped the cashier $10, who did what the court records show he did outside that house 4 times in 9 days in May 2026. Let me end with the question I started with. Not because I have an answer, but because I think it deserves to be stated plainly one more time. Law enforcement came to 182 Ohmer Road because of what Gary Jr. did outside the house, 4 times, to strangers, in public, where people could see, where people did see, where people called it in. And when they got there, they found 16 individuals who had been inside that house with Gary Jr. and 3 other adults for years, in a county that has described what they found as an unprecedented child welfare crisis, in conditions that the Ohio Attorney General said were almost indescribable. If Gary Jr. had no hesitation about what he did outside, in public, 4 times, where anyone could see, then the question the investigation is working to answer is a specific one. What happened inside, where no one could see, where 16 people had nowhere to go and no one to call, where the door was closed and the outside world had no idea what was behind it? The grand jury will eventually hear what investigators have assembled. The legal process will work through what the evidence shows. Gary Jr. has pleaded not guilty to all charges and is presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. But the question is there. It's in the court records. It's in the investigation that extends beyond Vinton County. It's in the Computer Crimes Division that was reportedly brought in to examine digital evidence. It's in the 9 days in May when the outside world finally got a glimpse of something. Not the thing itself, but something, and called the sheriff. And it's in the 30 days that followed when the warrant existed but the door stayed closed, until June 30th. Those 16 individuals are now in therapeutic foster care, receiving specialized support, beginning slowly with professional help, over a timeline that no one is rushing. Whatever comes after the door finally opened. That process will take time. It will require sustained commitment from the people providing their care. It will not be linear or fast or clean, but it has started. If you're following this case and want to continue as the grand jury develops and the August 13th hearing approaches and the investigation keeps building toward whatever it's building toward, subscribe to Crime Uncovered. We'll be here for every verified development. The question this case keeps asking doesn't have a public answer yet, but the investigation is working on one.